Okay, I want to talk a little bit about educating the whole person and thinking about different types of goals that we might have. One of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about were cognitive goals. The idea of Bloom's taxonomy, making sure that people have these higher level thinking skills, but also making sure that they have the background knowledge necessary to employ those higher level thinking skills in the real world, right? Um, There are other areas, though, that we might consider, one of them being affective outcomes or, values, dispositions, different parts of the person. And a lot of times people go into teaching not really thinking about how the content they teach interacts with the reasons that they really go into teaching for. Now, when I ask people, why do you want to teach, the usual answers I get are, I want to make a difference in people's lives, give back to society, help people live a better life, help people become good members of a community, develop their personality, give a voice to the little person, support people in their development, and so on. Right? All these really high idealistic ideas about something that's very community based. And an answer I almost never hear is that I really love a content area. I just love talking about science, or I love talking about math or social studies or business education or economics or whatever, right? Now, when you get to the college level, that's usually what it's like. People really like their content area, but they go into teaching because they like sharing that with other people. And again, it's this idea of giving back. Um, when we think about this first set of reasons about making a difference in people's lives and so on, and the content ourselves, the question is, how does one really work with the other? How can I make a difference in people's lives? And the answer that I have is that when you teach content, you are doing all these things. These are uh, the ultimate goals that you have, and the content is the gateway to help you get there. Now, when we think about the person, and I'm going to talk first about really just science, social studies, math, and language arts as four general content areas. I'll bring in business education later on. You can think of the person as somebody in the middle, and each one of these different areas, I'm going to argue, really supports the development of that person, right? When we think about how do we get a person to be the best person they can be, to be confident, to be strong, to be smart, to be savvy, to be successful, to be happy, each one of these areas lends something to the development of the whole person, of the soul of the person. And this isn't an idea that I came up with. A good friend of mine, Dr. Mark Jonas, who used to be here, used to, when he had the secondary people, take them on these philosophical walks in the woods and talk about how physical education or mathematics or art cultivates the soul of the individual. And I'm just trying to uh, apply that mostly to elementary education, because unlike the secondary people who teach one subject, elementary ed people usually teach multiple subjects. And as we see, you will be able to impact the whole person in a much more profound way than somebody who is limited to just one area. Not to say that those other areas aren't important, but it is a unique opportunity. Um, when we think of science, for example, and we ask ourselves, well, how does science help cultivate the soul of the person? Well, part of being a whole person is understanding the laws that govern our lives, the environment that we live in, how we interact with our environment, what effects our environment has on us, short term and long term. A lot of you work with the science content for your projects, and it's all about, right, how we live in the world and what our place is, not just in our community, but in, our ecosystem, in our country, in our planet, in the universe. What does our future look like scientifically? What laws govern it, right? How do we manage our resources? How do we live a good life? Those are questions that cannot really be answered without science. Because if they are, then we end up dumping oil into lakes and waters, and we have, a, a sea of plastic the size of Texas floating out in the Pacific that just is going to cause God knows what problems. And we make poor choices, and we ultimately doom ourselves to a future that we don't really desire. And so understanding how our actions impact those around us is an important element of what science does for the soul. Now, this scientific understanding can't really be had without mathematical knowledge. And when you understand numbers and how percentages and cumulative percentage increases ultimately end up growing exponentially, right? 10% followed by a 10% increase, followed by a 10% increase, and so on. Those percentages keep getting bigger and bigger until the amounts are astronomical. Understanding how the actions of one individual might not be significant, but if millions of individuals are doing those things, there is ultimately large change. Understanding scientific principles cannot be done without mathematics. Understanding society can't be done without mathematics. And you see that each one of these areas does not just educate the person by itself, but it informs the other areas, right? And so when I think about social policies and I think about allocations of funds and I think about disparities or differences in the amount of wealth that people have and what I feel comfortable with and how much I feel I need for myself and all the comparisons I do, I need to understand numbers in order to really get a handle on the truth of the matter or get closer to the truth. When I think about language arts, I think about the expression of emotion. I think about communication. I think about how we need words to tell people how we feel and to tell ourselves how we feel. That language is a key to self-discovery about what do I want, what do I care about, what do I value, and how can I make my feelings known to others, and how can I understand the feelings of others. I mean, when I think about how I viewed the world as a child, when I had a much more limited language base, it was a different way of understanding, a much more segmented, partitioned way of looking at the world. And as far as expressing how I feel and what I think to other people, I was, I think, appropriate for my age, but I didn't know the complexity of the thoughts I had because I didn't have a language for them. And if you think back to the story of Helen Keller, and I'm sure most people have heard of her at one point. You know, she was blind and deaf, and she could not communicate. And there's a story about when she first understood language, and it was a teacher, I believe, who was holding her hand underwater and making a symbol on her hand, like writing the word water, the symbol for water, and she finally got it, and it was a moment that was miraculous, and it changed her life. And she did not know what she did not know until she had language. And we can't truly know ourselves or understand science or math or social studies without language. And that leads us to finally social studies, where we talk about more specifically, you know, where is our place in the world of people? And how do we function? What drives us? What are our motivations, right? How do we live? What have we done in the past and what are we likely to do in the future? And what drives that behavior? And how do we really explain why we do things? And a lot of it's for economics, but economics in a much broader sense of when I do something and I want to trade something for something else, taking money out of it, you know, what is equitable? What is fair? And we get at these ideas of justice and fairness, again, that we need math for, right? And we need science for, if we're talking about living in the world. And we need to communicate these ideas in ways that people can understand and accept. And when I'm thinking about how these different content areas educate the whole person, right? Each one of these areas lends something different. And a teacher who gets a chance to teach all of these, if you have that view, I think the way that you teach it changes, and the messages and the point and the integration of these different areas, I think, becomes more clear to you and more clear to your students. Now, there's, you know, we do have two people who are in the business education program. And, you know, in the idea of business education, we have really two of these areas that are highlighted. And I think that most people go into this because, for the same reasons that elementary ed people do. Um, I didn't ask the people in this class, but through my conversations with them, I think that it's pretty similar. When we think about how does understanding business help you, how does it, not just help you negotiate the world, but how does it help you become a better person or more human or more self-actualized, if we use Maslow's hierarchy? Um, Social studies and math are the two primary areas that target it. And when we think of business, right, in terms of social studies, it is that economic driver. It is that idea of fairness. It's an understanding of how exchanges between people work, what counts as fair and what doesn't count as fair. Um, when we think about understanding how we want to live and what we want out of life, we need to also understand what are those behaviors that we can enact that are going to make that life more or less likely. Getting into bad loans, getting into credit card debt, right? High interest, risky loans. Uh, Understanding how the world works can either make your life much easier and much harder and make it much more difficult for you to live the life that you want to live, that allows you to be the person that you want to be, to understand who you really want. And now, of course, you do need math for this. You do need language and science as well, right? The science, you can't look at business and money and exchanges without thinking about the ecological impact of all that stuff. Uh, if we want to understand, human motivation at a brain level, that's science. If we want to understand the words of the law, right, the language that we speak, the relationships between ideas, we do need language. But it's heavily social studies, mostly economics and motivation, and math, understanding those numbers, that helps somebody really understand. And I think that when you apply, say, economic principles to behavior, and you look at behavioral economics, which is a fascinating field. If anybody has ever read the Freakonomics books or anything by Daniel Kahneman, uh, it's very worthwhile. Really understanding how people respond to incentives. And if you're thinking about it as a teacher, how do you get kids to do what you want them to do? How do you get them to learn? It is all about incentives and disincentives, right? Punishments and rewards. How do you make something appealing? It's in the idea of marketing. How do you present the idea in a more effective way to get people, kind of charged up about it, to get them the energy that they need to learn. And when you think about how the numbers support that, you do need sound mathematical principles to understand, again, exchange rates, quantities, different kinds of functions and relationships. But even something I think that most people think of as soulless, it's all about money in terms of business education, couldn't disagree more. If we look at it again through a lens of why are we involved in all these exchanges? Why do I want the things that I want? What do I need? Rather than what are the things that I just merely desire, become essential questions for understanding who you are, who you want to be, and what your place in the world is. Now, there will be a question on the final that asks you to kind of give me your take. It'll be about a half-page essay about how you view the things that I've said in here and what your perspective is on how you're going to use the content you teach to meet those loftier goals of developing the whole person, giving people a better life, creating good members of our society. That will be posted soon. I'll give you plenty of time to think about it. If you have any questions, let me know.